Hello everyone, my name is Lorenzo Jamone. I am a senior lecturer in robotics at the Queen Mary University of London. And in this video, I will talk about tactile sensing for robotic manipulation and fruit quality control. A little bit about myself to start. So I did my PhD at the IIT, the Italian Institute of Technology, and then I spent a couple of years in Japan at Waseda University as a research associate. After that, I've been to Portugal at the Instituto Superior Técnico. And finally, in 2016, I joined Queen Mary as a lecturer in robotics. This is Queen Mary. It's one of the Russell Group universities, meaning the 25 best universities in the UK. And we are ranked around 100 in the world for the quality of our teaching and our research. I do research in ARC, the Advanced Robotics Center at Queen Mary, which is a recently established center led by Professor Kaspar Althofer. More specifically, I lead a team that goes under the name of CRISP, Cognitive Robotics and Intelligent Systems for the People. We have a twofold objective, which is, on the one hand, to create smart robots by taking inspiration from biology, and on the other hand, to really understand more about human intelligence by implementing biologically inspired algorithms into our robots. In particular, we focus on the intelligence of our hands, the extraordinary ability we have to use the hands to explore and understand the external environment, to grasp and manipulate objects, and even to communicate with each other. And in these research efforts, we are supported by several national and international funding bodies and companies. We use human-inspired strategies for the robot to grasp objects for which we do not have any prior information. We don't know where the objects are, what is their shape, if they're hard or soft, and we collect all this information in real time using both cameras and tactile sensors. We test different solutions on a large number of different objects, and we compare them against each other using statistical analysis, so that we can really understand which solution works best and why. For applications in which we really want to make sure the grasp is stable, such as the robotic handling of delicate or dangerous items in hazardous environments, the robot performs haptic exploration before picking the object, to gather more information about the shape and stiffness of the object and to make sure the most precise and robust grasp is selected. For other applications in which we require dexterous manipulation of the object after it is picked, we use teleoperation to teach manipulation actions to the robot. The human user can directly control the movement of the robot hand, and when the robot touches something, the tactile feedback is sent to the user using small vibrating motors placed on a wearable glove. After one manipulation action is demonstrated to the robot, for example, the translation of an object within the hand, the robot is able to reproduce this action in different conditions in the future, for example, using a different object, or making the translation longer or shorter. We are also investigating the role of hand movements in social interaction, also to understand how to make human-robot interaction more natural and effective. In one project, we look at how our hand movements change if we do not understand each other during a conversation. In another project, we investigate how moving our own hands, but also looking at someone else moving, helps us to understand musical rhythms and to synchronize with them. One topic we are very interested in is the sense of touch, and this is in fact the major focus of this presentation. And the sense of touch is fundamental in humans, not just to be able to manipulate objects, but also to understand some of their physical properties. And this is true for robots as well. And in fact, most of the robots that are used today, they do not have the sense of touch. They are employed in industry, in a structured environment. They can manipulate objects, but typically only rigid objects. And most importantly, when they manipulate those objects, they do not gather any additional information about them, for example, about their structural integrity. However, if we would have robots with the sense of touch, then we can employ them in other settings, in other areas, for example, agriculture. We could be able to manipulate soft, delicate objects and to gather information about the object while they are manipulated. So for example, think about a robot that is picking some fruit. It could be able not only to pick them gently without crushing them, but also to understand whether they are at the right ripeness to be picked, or in general to assess something about their quality. And we have today several solutions for electronic skins to provide the robot with a sense of touch, several technology that can be used. In particular, I will focus in today's presentation on magnetic, because that's the solution we have been using for several years. And because I think magnetic has specific properties, in particular related to the high sensitivity and high signal-to-noise ratio and fast response, that are very interesting for electronic skins that are applied to robotic manipulation. In the case of magnetic, the idea is that you can have a magnetic source embedded into a soft material, or in general a material that will deform upon a certain contact. And then this magnetic source will generate a magnetic field which is measured by a magnetic sensor. In the case of this picture, a Hall effect sensor, for example. Now, if a contact is applied, the material will be deformed and the magnetic source will be displaced with respect to the sensor. So basically, through magnetism, we are measuring the displacement of the magnetic source with respect to the magnetic sensor. And magnetic is indeed a very established solution to measure displacement. It's used, is an industry standard, it's used in industry in many applications. So it's accurate, robust, and largely available. It can be miniaturized, and the sensors that are available in the market, they are already small, which is an advantage. Also, we don't need to put electronics inside the material that will be deformed. It can be damaged by the deformation. So we'll now introduce two families of sensors that we have been working on during the past 6 to 10 years. The first family is inspired by the Merkel disc, which is one of the receptors for pressure. We have a small magnet embedded into a silicon body, and then a Hall effect sensor mounted on the rigid part of the robot, for example, the fingertip. In between, we added a small air gap for the sensor to be more sensitive. When a pressure is applied externally, the magnet moves with respect to the sensor, and therefore, by measuring the magnetic field, we can estimate the external pressure. The advantage of this kind of sensors in practice is that they are soft, and this is important for a robotic hand, because if the fingertips are soft, they can naturally comply with the object, making grasping and manipulation easier. They are extremely sensitive, so they can measure very small forces. And here you see a couple of things that we can do with this sensor. Of course, one important thing in robotics is safety, especially in human-robot interaction. So here we implemented a behavior in which the robot is just randomly moving, and when the hand with the fingertips are touching something, the wrist is moved in order to avoid this obstacle. And you can see here that because the sensors are very sensitive, a light touch is detected and the wrist is already bending. making the robot very safe to be around with humans. Another situation, if we want the robot to catch an object. Let's say that the robot has detected through vision that bottle, but then vision can be not perfect, but if the robot has tactile sensing on the finger, it can stop the motion right after touching the object. And this, of course, is beneficial for grasping and also to start getting information about the object, for example, for object recognition. Indeed, we also did experiments of object recognition, or better, object classification, in which we compared two situations. One, the robot is trying to recognize object only by their shape, by enclosing the hand around the object. In the other case, the robot is equipped with tactile sensor, and so in addition to the shape, it can also gather information about the softness, the stiffness of the object. And we show that with tactile sensing, we can distinguish in between more objects, and especially we can distinguish between objects that might be ambiguous because they have similar shape, but they have different softness. An improvement to the first prototype came a couple of years ago when we simply substituted the one-dimensional Hall effect sensor with a three-dimensional Hall effect sensor. So this kind of tactile sensor can now detect not only normal forces, so the forces that will generate a displacement of the magnet in one dimension, either going closer to the sensor or going farthest for the sensor, but also shear forces, so the lateral motion of the magnet and of the structure. And the detection of these shear forces is particularly interesting for robotic manipulation, because by detecting them we can, for example, say something about the weight of the object pulled down, and we can control the grip of the robot so that objects do not fall. And this is in fact some experiments that we did with these sensors. We covered the hand of this robot with the sensor, and here in the plot you see the readings from this specific sensor on the index finger. You see that when the robot is touching, we have a blue component, a normal component. When the object is lifted, we have also a red component, which is a shear component. So again, you see shear component here. Now, this kind of prototype still has a limitation in that if you apply the same force on different locations over the sensor, over the body of the sensor, they will generate a different displacement of the magnet with respect to the magnetic sensor. And therefore, you may have different readings for the same applied force. So this is not a problem if the contact area is as big as the surface of the sensor. So if the object is bigger than the surface of the sensor, then you don't have this problem. So one way of limiting this problem is to have small sensor so that the objects the robot will interact with are typically bigger. And another way of limiting this problem is to have more than one sensor, to have distributed sensor. And this is what we did in the later prototype of our technology. So in this case, for example, we realized flat sensors that can be put on parallel robotic grippers like this one, which have a matrix of, in this case, 4x4 of these individual sensors. And you see here a close-up of how they are fabricated. It's basically the same technology, but made smaller and distributed. So in this case, in addition to what we could detect before, we have also additional information about the shape of the contact and the shape of the object. And we can detect the force more precisely. We are not limited anymore by the location of the contact, because you can estimate where the contact happens. And specifically, to cover the entire portion of the fingertip, not just the internal part, but also the sides, we developed these sensors also by using flexible electronics so that we can cover multi-curved surfaces. And this version of the sensor was presented at the IEEE ICRA conference, and we got second place for the award of the best soft component presented. And this is a video showing similar behaviors to what I showed you before, but now the estimation of the forces is much more accurate, because we can estimate not only the force but also the position in which the force is applied, because we have a distributed information. And so we can, for example, detect slips and estimate the weight of the object. Another family of sensors we have been working on is inspired to a different receptor, to the hair follicle. So we developed a bio-inspired artificial cilia. And the idea here is to have, again, a soft body, which in this case is a very small and soft, flexible cilia made of silicon materials, which has some magnetic particles inside. And when the cilia is deformed because of an applied force, a giant magnetoresistive sensor below the surface can detect this variation. And therefore, with this sensor, we are able to detect very small forces, which generates very small deflections of this cilia. And this was a work coming from an international collaboration of different partners: Queen Mary University of London, INESC Microsystem and Nanotechnologies, and Instituto Superior Técnico in Portugal, KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia, and Waseda University in Japan. And really, this has been the work of a brilliant master and now PhD student, Pedro Ribeiro, here in the picture. And therefore, I will leave it to him to tell you more details about how this artificial cilia has been manufactured and how it works.
The sensor is composed by three parts. The cilia tactile sensor, which is a sensing element of our device, and it is connected to a support PCB that will provide the connection to the data acquisition board. The data acquisition board reads the analog signal from the sensor and converts it to a digital representation that is communicated to the computer. The sensing element itself is composed by a passive magnetic cilia, which will deform on contact and generate the magnetic signal that is read by the magnetic sensor die underneath. The magnetic sensor die is composed by a set of 2 by 20 micrometer squared sensing elements, themselves composed by a stack of thin metallic films. When a magnetic field is applied to the sensor, a variation in resistance is observed in these elements. This variation in resistance occurs due to the tunneling magnetoresistance effect, or TMR effect for short. Two groups of thin films with magnetic properties exist in the stack, separated by a thin 1.4 nanometer layer of aluminium oxide. The total height of this stack is 100 nanometers and is patterned into sensing elements of 2 by 20 micrometers squared. The top portion of the films were combined in such a way that the magnetization of these films is pinned, that is, the magnetization remains constant independently of the external magnetic field. On the bottom part, however, the magnetization of the films does rotate when a magnetic field is applied. When a current is applied to the stack, electrons will flow through it. crossing the insulating aluminum oxide thin film by quantum tunneling effect. The probability of an electron crossing this barrier is proportional to the angle between the magnetization directions of the free and pin portions of the stack, being maximum when the layers are antiparallel to one another and minimum when they are parallel. Macroscopically, this effect manifests itself as a variation in resistance of the TMR element, with a linear relation between applied magnetic field and resistance being observed. To facilitate integration with the robotic platform, the sensor die is produced using a Wheatstone bridge configuration. This configuration is achieved by combining sensing elements with antiparallel sensitive directions. That is, some of the elements will present high resistance for low applied magnetic fields, while others present low resistance for low applied magnetic fields. When combined, as is presented in the schematic, a differential voltage can be measured in the bridge branches that will present a bipolar, zero-centered response to the magnetic field. Our developed die has two sensitive directions, X and Y axes. However, only one is used in this work. As for the cilia, it is made as a cylinder composed of a mixture of neodymium iron boron magnetic particles with a PDMS polymeric matrix at a proportion of 65% magnetic particles to 35% PDMS in mass. The particle magnetization is oriented in the cilia axial direction, which will induce a permanent magnetic field within the cilia and the surrounding space. When the cilia bends, this magnetic field will change, thus inducing a variation on the signal of the magnetic sensor underneath. Variation in magnetic field is monotonic, and therefore has a one-to-one correspondence between cilia deformation and signal, thus allowing our device to measure surface topography and texture. In this demonstration, you can see the sensor being actuated. As the user touches the cilia, the corresponding deflection is measured in real time. The sensor has a data acquisition rate of up to 1000 samples per second and a resolution of 24 bits.
So as I mentioned before, with this sensor we can detect very small forces, particularly forces in the area of 100 of micronewtons. And in this experiment, we made a metal sheet with some very small holes and grooves inside. And by moving the sensor over this metal surface, we were able to precisely find the position and the dimension of these grooves. Later, we decided to apply the same idea and the same technique to a different problem. We found an apple in the lab that was there for more than 6 months, and don't ask me why, but we put it close together with a fresh apple. And if you look at the picture here, you may see that from vision is not straightforward to tell which one is the bad apple and which one is the good apple. So we were wondering, maybe by touching the apple, the texture of the apple will tell us more clearly which one is the good one. And therefore we performed the experiment, and this is paper that has been awarded as a best paper finalist in the agri-food category.
The cilia are made using a master mold technique and therefore are easily interchangeable. 3 configurations were tested for this work. One using a single 3 mm high by 400 micrometer diameter cilia, another using a 3x3 cilia matrix with 1.6 mm high and 320 micrometer diameter, and another using the same 3x3 cilia matrix with 3 mm high and 400 micrometer diameter cilia. This device was attached to a Geomagic Touch haptic interface, programmed as a robotic arm, which will perform the movement of the sensor on the fruit. An Arduino communicates with the cilia sensor and serves as its PC interface. The fruit under test is placed on a vise to hold it still during testing. 2 types of fruit were tested, strawberries of the Sabrina variety and apples of the Brayburn variety. For each type of fruit, 12 ripe and 12 rotten fruits were tested. For strawberries, senescence was achieved naturally, while for apples, due to their long conservation time, the senescence was cold triggered by placing them at a temperature of minus 18 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. The test sequence is performed in 4 steps. First, the robotic arm lowers the cilia against the fruit until it makes contact with it. This is performed automatically, using a threshold. Then, the arm makes a fast movement to orient the cilia in the sensitive direction of the sensor. The stand begins afterwards and is performed at a constant velocity of 100 micrometers per second. Finally, the arm returns to its initial position. This cycle is repeated 10 times for each fruit. 3 features are extracted from the fruit scan, each corresponding to one of the fruit tactile features. Stiffness is estimated by taking the average value of the first 100 signal points, as the initial deflection of the cilia against the fruit will depend mainly on its firmness. Waviness is the low-frequency behavior of the surface texture. It is estimated by low-pass filtering the signal using a 1000-point moving average and taking its standard deviation. Roughness, on the other hand, uses a high-pass filter to eliminate frequencies below 120 Hz and taking the standard deviation of the resulting signal. 2 classification methods were employed: Gaussian naive Bayes classifier and the random forest classifier using 100 classification trees. These methods were chosen as they allow the usage of Bayesian updating, as more scans on the fruits are performed. Validation was performed using a leave one out cross-validation method. All the combinations of the 3 configurations of sensors with both fruits were tested. In this slide, the accuracy after the 10 scans are performed is shown. In general, apple classification achieved higher accuracies than strawberry testing, with the best overall performance occurring for the case where the single cilium sensor was used for testing apples, reaching an accuracy of 96%. However, when testing strawberries, configuration C cilia showed the best performance, with 83% of accuracy. We hypothesize that this is due to the larger area of contact of configuration C. When using a sensor with higher spatial resolution, that is, lower contact area, any bumps on top of the surface will be accounted by the classification algorithm. This is beneficial for smooth fruits, such as the apple, but not naturally bumpy fruits, such as a strawberry. By using a higher contact surface, the result of the measurement will be averaged over the whole contact area, limiting the effect of existing bumps. Furthermore, accuracies do not differ substantially between both algorithms, revealing that good results can be achieved by this sensor mainly due to its capability of collecting relevant data, regardless of the used classification method.
Okay, so in summary, I have presented 2 families of solutions for tactile sensors based on magnetisms and soft materials, and they have been applied to robotic manipulation and also to understand properties of objects, and have presented specifically one application for fruit quality control. And thank you for the attention, and feel free to get in touch.